Hello, this is Frank Nieto with Vision Quest Auto, and today I'm reviewing this car here, the brand new 2024 Volkswagen Atlas. This particular model is the top of the line SEL Premium R line version, so it has all the bells and whistles that Volkswagen's putting out in the Atlas here. And it's a good car, bordering on great. It's a car that, when it first was announced several years ago, I was very excited about. I'm a Volkswagen fan. I was very excited about the fact that Volkswagen was coming out with a full-size SUV. At the time, they only had the Tiguan, which was, of course, a smaller version of the Tiguan that we have now. So it was essentially a wagon. It wasn't a whole lot of space in the car, in that SUV. It was still a very good SUV, but its use case was pretty limited for consumers. So this particular model coming out was there to try to identify all the gaps that Volkswagen had, namely a three-row SUV. So this really came in, and out of the box, Volkswagen hit what was probably a solid single, maybe a double. It did a lot of things right, and it missed the mark in a lot of ways as well. Number one thing that it did right was it had tons of space. It was one of the largest three-row SUVs in a non-full-size SUV. So when you're talking about the mid-size class, this really competed with a ton of larger vehicles like the Chevy Tahoe that had a ton of third row space. The Atlas could do that in a smaller body. So it was a really good deal as far as that went. The materials were nice, the cabin was nice, the tech features were nice. You're seeing a lot of it was nice. The engine was not great. Even its V6 was underpowered compared to most rivals. It just didn't really have the oomph that you'd want from a vehicle this size. So that was unfortunate. The other thing that it didn't have going for it was the tech was kind of clunky. The infotainment system was kind of clunky to use. It was a solid first effort, but it wasn't the vehicle that I think a lot of Volkswagen fans were really, really hoping for. It just was a little bit short. That said, this version, Volkswagen has redesigned for the 2024 model year, refreshed, I should say. This is not fully redesigned. It is a refreshed model. So, but it's very close to redesigned. As you can tell, it has a lot of the same looks. We'll walk through this a little bit more, but it has a lot of the same looks. But it takes the upgrades in some noticeable areas. First of all, the engine is a new engine. The tech system, the infotainment system, has been updated as well. These address a lot of the issues, but does it fix the issues that I and many other reviewers and shoppers had with the previous generation? Well, let's find out. The Atlas here is pretty similar looking to the previous version, the previous generation here, before the refresh. It still has a ton of room inside. I mean, it's almost pickup truck level room. That's not just for the front row, it's for the second row as well. As you can tell, got a booster seat in here for my daughter. Still lots of room in there, So it's a really good amount of room. Similar look. So if you like the way that the Atlas looked, you're going to like the way that this one looks as well. It's a good thing. I think it's an attractive SUV. Now, that said, Volkswagen has addressed a lot of the criticisms. Namely, there were two things there, and we'll hit on those in a second. But I do want to talk about some of the pros. First thing off is its price. It starts at a very reasonable price. The starting level, when we're talking about the first couple trims, this vehicle tends to beat a lot of its competitors. So it's a very good value proposition. However, when you get up in the price range, the Atlas kind of approaches them. For example, I reviewed the Toyota Grand Highlander. And I know the vehicles, the thing that happens is that I had the top of the line Toyota Grand Highlander, and the Grand Highlander was the Hybrid Max Platinum version. So it was fully loaded. It was about $60,000. The problem here is that this Platinum R line is about $60,000. It's maybe $3,000 less. But when you're talking about it, when you're looking at it, it's hard to justify going with this over the Grand Highlander when the Grand Highlander is more fuel efficient, is more powerful, has just as much room, has a nicer interior, and an easier to use infotainment system. There are obviously personal reasons to go with a Volkswagen over a Toyota. You may like the looks of the Volkswagen more. You may like the looks of the Toyota more. You may like the feel a little bit more for one over the other. I will say one of the few criticisms I had about the Grand Highlander were its brakes. The brakes in the Atlas are more linear. They're not as mushy. They don't take as much time to get used to. They're great. Is brakes feel enough of a shifter for you to go with? I don't know. That's for you to decide. What I will say is there's a lot to like about this. This has got a great ride. It's very smooth. It feels great. It's great to see Volkswagen kind of being Volkswagen again. And when I say that, Volkswagen, when I was a kid, when I had a Volkswagen, I had a Jetta back in the day, they were a value proposition, but they delivered a lot for it. It wasn't just a lower price. They would compete with other value, groups like a Toyota, like a Honda. But Volkswagen would give you a little bit more upscale interior, a little bit more tech features, compared to a Toyota and a Honda. So it's nice to see that they're bringing that back. But the way that I look at this, at the Volkswagen Atlas, is the 2024 Volkswagen Atlas, I should say, is it's a similar vehicle to somebody like a Jeremy Roenick. Chicago Blackhawks, great. Philadelphia Flyers, great. Really strong career, but he happened to play at the same time as Mario Lemieux, Wayne Gretzky, Mark Messier, Steve Yzerman. And unfortunately, those guys tended to overshadow him, even a Brett Hull, even in different positions here. But there's nothing wrong with Jeremy Roenick, just like there's nothing wrong with the Reggie Miller. He just happened to play at the same time as Michael Jordan. It happens. Volkswagen Atlas is a really good vehicle on its own. But when you compare it to something like a Grand Highlander, or even a Highlander on its own, or a Telluride, it falls a little bit short. And it's on the margins, but those margins matter. They add up to just different category wins. You're going to get a stronger engine with the top of the line Grand Highlander. You're going to get, you're going to get a little bit more comfort features with a Telluride and a Grand Highlander, frankly. These things are just going to start to sway more and more shoppers, I think. But again, there's a place for a vehicle like the Atlas, and it's a really strong choice. But I don't know if it competes as well with some of the other vehicles in its class. All right, so again, we're going to address some of the cons here. And the cons, really, it's the same two cons. They've improved these two things, but they still remain. The number one issue that people had was the engine wasn't quite as powerful. Now, on its own, this engine is fine. It's actually pretty strong, does a great job. The issue that with this is it just can't compete with something that comes out of the Grand Highlander. It can't compete with just a lot of other vehicles out there. You can't compete with a Grand Cherokee. Those vehicles have stronger engines. It's very close, though. It is closing that gap. It still falls short of the competition. The other issue, and this is really the bigger issue, because honestly, this engine's fine. You're going to get this, and you won't really notice a difference, unless you go back to back between a Grand Highlander or a Telluride or a Grand Cherokee, you're not going to notice that this engine isn't quite delivering. You would have in the previous version of the Atlas. This one, it's fine. You know, it delivers the power you want, it delivers the torque you want when you want it. The brakes are good, the handling's great. It does a really nice job. But the tech offerings are where this falls a little short, and it's not the tech itself. The tech itself is there. It's got you know, a great screen. It's a great touch screen. It's got all the safety features you would want. The issue is that everything that Volkswagen did is they included touch screens, touch controls for everything just about in this car. And again, it doesn't take a lot to get used to. I mean, it's not a big deal. If you want to adjust the climate, you just get used to tapping the slider. You can slide. I would recommend tapping it. That's what I've discovered is a little bit easier. If you want to go from, say, 70 to 72, tap it. If you slide, you'll probably get to 73, 74. You might go to 77. You know, it's a little bit of an issue. But the bigger thing is when you're driving, it's harder to just locate these sliders and these buttons and these touch controls. Volkswagen laid it out well. It's good for a full touchscreen system. I want to make that clear, you know, but when your heated and cooled seats are inside of a touchscreen, even if it's right there in front of you, it's not as easy as just clicking an actual physical button. That's just the way it is. The volume is the same thing. You know, you want to adjust the volume. The other thing that I've noticed is that the Atlas starts off at a low volume, which is great. You don't want to start your car and it's blaring at you. It's cool that it starts at a lower volume, but then to raise it, you have to hit the slider. You can go past where you want to. I've discovered just using the volume controls on the steering wheel works out better. You know, again, it's not a deal breaker, but when you compare it against the competition, it just doesn't, it's not as good. You know, Toyota had a lot of issues over the years with infotainment systems. Their screens weren't as crisp and clear. Their controls were wonky, especially in Lexuses. So a different brand, but I'm just going to note that, you know, Toyota Lexus had issues with their controls, their infotainment controls, and they've addressed that. They fixed that. Kia's done a fantastic job. Volkswagen has made the system better in some ways, but worse in other ways. And so that's where it falls short on. And again, I'm going to go into categories, the fat guy in little coat category. You know, I don't want to harp on it, but it is the infotainment system. It's got to be the infotainment system. Everything else about this car is damn near perfect. And when you get into it, again, it's not a big issue. I would not hold back from a firm recommendation of the Atlas based on the infotainment controls. Seriously, it's stupid, but it doesn't fit with this car because this car is almost there and it's looking at something where you're like, you're just short. It's somebody who's maybe, you know, an athlete when you think about it, who's missing that one piece that they're almost there. They're almost at superstar level and they fall short. And that's where I think this is. Now, it's a very correctable issue. Honestly, Volkswagen doesn't even need to do a full redesign to make this car just as good as most of the other SUVs, three-row SUVs around. All they have to do is just address this. And it's as simple as adding a physical volume knob. It's as simple as adding a heated seat and cooled seat physical buttons. Now, is that going to make, that's not as simple as it sounds, but it is simple. It's simple from an issue to address. Actually doing it, of course, I know it's going to cost Volkswagen money. It's going to mean that the engineers have to find a way to fit this stuff in, but it's very, very well, you know, it's very, very fixable. Now, one thing, I've knocked the infotainment system a bit. One thing I want to note is I love the sounds that it makes. So I do like that while everything's touchscreen, it gives you very firm sounding controls. And I'll click, click. It sounds like a physical controller, which means that somebody at Volkswagen actually knew that this was an issue and they addressed it by putting in those sounds. So it's great, but it is what it is. So that's your fat guy in little coat category. Again, not a deal breaker, but it keeps it from the top of the pack in my mind.
All that's to say that this is a livable car for sure. This brings me to a long-term view. And with that, we're not talking about dependability because that's just not something that I'm comfortable in doing. I'm not even sure if anybody can really make those cases for how dependable a car is when it's new. What I'm going to do is talk about your long-term choice. Do I think that ultimately is this something where, is the technology going to be able to last you for a while? Is the comfort going to be able to last you for a while? Is the styling going to be able to last you for a while? Is the performance, that mileage? Are you going to have a part where you're like, I kind of wish that I had gotten something else. I don't feel comfortable buying this. And I'll tell you that, I can give you like a 5 or a 5+ year rating or, discussion on whether I think that this car will really hold up for you long term. And by long term, I mean about 5 years or so, 5 years plus. And for the Atlas, I think you'll be fine. That just straight up, I think that from a styling perspective, Volkswagen nails it. It has the old school SUV look, but it's got some modern cuts to it. It's an understated design. I don't think it's going to be one of those ones where it's like, it's so old looking that it stands out in the wrong way. And it tried to be something so new that it stands out in another way that you didn't want it to. I don't think, the wood accents, everything like that. The design of the car, its interior is another one that's perfect. It's great. You're going to really love that. Space is fantastic. It's above the board for the class. So I don't think you'll have an issue with that. Tech, now this is where it gets a little bit different. Tech, the features, I think you're fine for 5 years. Now, granted, there's going to be stuff that the auto industry come out with that you're not going to have in this car. It could be things like, I know that Apple and Google are working on larger versions of Apple CarPlay, Android Auto that are more focused on bringing in the controls of the car to that. It's possibility that this could be added later through some kind of an update by Volkswagen and Apple and Google. I don't really know about that. If that's something you're interested in, you might want to wait on a car, or wait to hear from manufacturers whether they're doing that and what models they'll do that with. I think that the technology will last for a long time. It looks great. But I do think that it's overly touch sensitive, and that could be something that really, if you're thinking along the lines of, well, I'll get used to this, you will get used to it. But if it's bothering you now, consider that. I wouldn't say to just say, I'm not going to buy this car because of that, but it's something to definitely consider. And the same goes for the engine. I think the engine's great. I think the transmission's really solid. I did notice a slight hesitancy off the line. It's just a bigger vehicle. I don't know how much that had to do with the stop start. Otherwise, the engine had lots of power on the highway and had no problem passing vehicles and getting, merging into traffic, anything like that. It was great. So that's where I'm looking at it from that point of view. The Atlas is a really, really good 3-row SUV. I think it's in the top 5 for sure. And it's definitely one you should look at if you're shopping in this category. But it's playing at a time, it's out at the time that the Grand Highlander's out, that the Grand Cherokee L is out, that the Telluride is out, that that the Tahoe is still running strong, that the Suburban's still running strong, the Expedition's still running strong, the regular Highlander. There's so many really strong SUVs out there, 3-row SUVs out there, the Wagoneer, Grand Wagoneer, that it's a stacked competition. And so, if the Atlas was running, back in the, just a few years ago at this level, it would be without a doubt like the best. Instead, it has to contend for that title of the best. I'm not saying it's not the best. It's in the top 5.
That concludes our review of the 2024 Volkswagen Atlas for Vision Quest Auto. This is Frank Nieto. I want to thank you for watching, and we'll see you around next time.